All right. So place a comma before a conjunction introducing a coordinate clause. Let's check this sentence out. The early records of the city have disappeared, comma, and the story of its first years can no longer be reconstructed. The situation is perilous, comma, but there is still one chance of escape. So, not to overwhelm you guys with the details of every little place to put a comma, but I'm hoping that this sheds some light on what can normally be seen as good grammar practice. Um, Essentially, I always look for the connecting words. Like if there's some contrast or some comparison, or there's like differences between the beginning phrase and the next phrase, that there's some tissue there that should be sort of compared as the other, then normally you're gonna need a comma, even if there's an and. So the early records of the city have disappeared, and the story of its first years can no longer be reconstructed. So what that actually shows is it sort of shows a furthermore. Um, the early records of the city have disappeared. Uh, or something that like further clarifies the beginning phrase, the early phrase, um, which would necessitate a comma. Uh, it's not as obvious as the next sentence, but I think with practice and a lot of reading and a lot of writing, it becomes obvious. Um, when there's a but or there's a yet, I mean, almost always you are going to see a place to put a comma. The situation is perilous, but there is hope. Period. The situation is perilous, but there is still one chance of escape. Period. So when you say but yet, um, words that connect and that show contrast, they generally have a comma preceding them. So sentences of this type, isolated from the context, may seem to be in need of rewriting, as they make complete sense when the comma is reached. The second clause has the appearance of an afterthought. Further, comma and is the least specific of connectives. Used between independent clauses, it indicates only that a relation exists between them without defining that relation. In the example above, the relation is that of cause and result. Yeah, cause and result. So the early records of the city have disappeared, cause, and then the story of its first years can no longer be reconstructed. Result, or the effect. So it's saying, hey, if there's a cause and effect with these two phrases, these two clauses, and there's only an and here, you're going to put a comma in front of it. The two sentences might be rewritten. So this says, hey, if you're not sure, let's rephrase them. As the early records of the city have disappeared, the story of its first years can no longer be reconstructed. So you can pull out the and change that to an as, and it's going to be a comma. As the early records of the city have disappeared, comma, the story of its first. So that's actually a good practice, a good way to test. Before you write that sentence with the comma and, you can write it on the side or type it or write it in your head, and see how it looks. Because if the comma fits here, it's probably going to fit here. And here, although the situation is perilous, remember they changed it to although, comma, there is still one chance of escape. Or the subordinate clauses might be replaced by phrases. Owing to the disappearance of the early records of the city, the story of its first years can no longer be reconstructed. In this perilous situation, there is still one chance of escape. A lot of it, yeah, so if they can be replaced by phrases, but a writer may err by making his sentences too uniformly compact and periodic, and an occasional loose sentence prevents the style from becoming too formal and gives the reader a certain relief. Consequently, loose sentences of the type first quoted are common in easy, unstudied writing, but a writer should be careful not to construct too many of his sentences after this pattern. We won't go over all these little rules. I'm just sort of going over the gist. But all this stuff is on the phenomenal website Gutenberg.org. Elements of Style by William Strunk. Now, two-part sentences of which the second member is introduced by as likewise require a comma before the conjunction. All right, so let's look at some examples. Let's look at some examples. So right here, I had never been in the place before, semicolon, so I had difficulty in finding my way about. So it's saying if the second member is introduced by an adverb before, right, wherever, so adverb, so I had difficulty in finding my way about. The connective so and yet may be used either as adverbs or as conjunctions, accordingly as the second clause is felt to be coordinate or subordinate. So right here, as I had never been in the place before, comma, I had difficulty in finding my way about. So that's really helpful. If you know that if you change that to the as and you move that so, you're going to have a comma and it fits, it sounds right, it looks right, then that would be helpful to put a semicolon there. This is a really good strategy, I think, with regards to choosing what punctuation to write. And it's really, really helpful. So if a dependent clause or an introductory phrase requiring to be set off by a comma precedes the second independent clause, no comma is needed after the conjunction. All right, so let's check out the sentence. The situation is perilous, but if we are prepared to act promptly, there's still one chance of escape. So but on this we've got, so this sentence we've got two commas. They're pretty obvious as far as where they need to go. Comma, but if, right here, if we are prepared to act promptly, comma, there is still one chance of escape. Well, of course, we're not going to put a comma after the conjunction, which would be fanboys, which would be but. We're talking about but here, I believe. So, of course, we're not going to have a but, comma, after the but. It's going to be before. So, before the but. Situation perilous. But, if you're prepared to act promptly, comma, there's still a chance of escape. All right, so when the subject is the same for both clauses and is expressed only once, a comma is required if the connective is but. Well, that makes sense, right? I think we've talked about that. And it's because the but or the yet, generally, they're showing contrast. So that visibly shows the reader that, hey, there's contrast coming up. There's a bit of other that's going to show up. So it visually also is evidence of contrast. If the connective is and, the comma should be omitted if the relation between the two statements is close or immediate. It's a little bit vague, but again, it's a little bit vague as far as a description, but it's very clear as far as in practice and just seeing and like learning by reading a lot. It's really going to make sense. Like, oh, this just doesn't look right with a comma. This just doesn't look right without a comma. Now that's kind of a cop out, but that's really how it ends up becoming the more you immerse yourself in reading and writing, etc. I have heard his arguments, but I'm still unconvinced. So the comma but, or largely the comma yet, as I've been saying, you're usually going to have a comma before those, or before that word. He has had several years' experience and is thoroughly competent. They're very connective. Several years' experience equals competent. So they're extremely related, very close, very synonymous. So you're not going to have a comma there. If he said he has had several years' experience and is always on time, or and is and is always on time, or and always completes his projects ahead of schedule, period. Since that's not those aren't connected exactly like synonymous, or say Andy has a great sense of humor, then you might want to put a comma and, because they're not directly related. But several years experience equals competence. The longer you've been in a certain job, you're going to get pretty competent at that job. So those are very, very synonymous. A lot of practice, um, is all that it will take to continue to improve in these arenas. I know it looks very heady and challenging and, dare I say, daunting at times. Um, but just really going through and looking at some of these examples and studying books like, The Elements of Style, and really patiently going through the dictionary, the thesaurus, looking through books like this, um, you know, just really patiently plodding along as a student will help you improve dramatically your writing day in and day out. Thank you very much.